My name is Liz Bohannon. Forkin is indeed my real name. I have had more people than I can count think it is a good place joke, and that's really my way of saying Liz effing Bohannon, but it's actually really my name, Liz Bohannon. I live in Portland, Oregon with my husband, Ben, our 3 boys. We've got 3 kids under the age of 6. And I am the co-founder and CEO of Seiko Designs, and most recently the chief growth officer of Noonday Collection, which historically was our biggest competitor that we have recently merged with. And so kind of leaning into and exploring that role. And I'm also the author of a book called Beginner's Pluck, podcast host of Plucking Up, and a speaker and lover of queso. Oh, the quick and dirty is that when I was just a young lassie, I moved to East Africa with a master's degree in journalism and a lot of interest and curiosity about girls living in extreme poverty and in conflict and post-conflict zones. And so I headed to Uganda with the idea of just learning and listening, hopefully making some friends. And I ended up meeting an incredible group of young women in between high school and university who tested into college but could not afford to go, and did a lot of different things in response to that, all of which failed, which may have instilled very early on in my career my love for failure stories, and ended up designing a pair of funky strappy sandals, now known as Seiko sandals. Taught 3 young women, Mary, Mercy, and Rebecca, how to make these sandals, and then promised them that if they made these sandals for their gap year in between high school and university, that they would continue on to college. And I came back home to the US, started slinging sandals out of the back of my car. And fast forward 12 years later, Seiko grew into an international fashion brand. We work with artisan organizations all over the world, I think on most continents, not Europe and not Antarctica. And we are creating dignified fair wage jobs because 98% of our brothers and sisters in the global fashion supply chain do not earn a living wage. And in addition to that, creating opportunity and investing in really academically gifted female scholars across the globe. Listen, I really wish that I could be one of those people that tells you that like, oh, I start my day by waking up at 4:30 in the morning so I can get in like a workout and some quiet time before any of my kids wake up. And that would be a lie. I am in a season of life where I sleep as absolutely long and late as my children will allow for me to, because I have no idea. Are they going to wake me up at 5:30? Am I going to get to have a luxurious sleep-in day until like 6:45? I never know. So I take what I can get, which means that when I wake up in the morning, it is usually because a small child is opening my door and coming and jumping in bed with me, and we cuddle for a few minutes, which is actually an amazing way to start your day. And then that starts pretty much the just frazzleness of the day. It's like from then on, getting the kids ready, getting them, dressed and ready for school, getting breakfast and lunches made, and getting our kids out the door. And then generally, I am starting my day by hopping on an 8:30 meeting about 5 minutes late while I'm still driving home from school. And that's kind of how, and then it's chaos until they go to bed and it starts all over again. So follow me for more tips about how to have a super zen life. So the title kind of came from, the name of my book is called Beginner's Pluck. I'm very passionate actually about the word pluck. So my book is called Beginner's Pluck, and it's all about how we can really intentionally channel our inner beginner, because I deeply believe that contrary to a lot of kind of the self-help advice that we get around finding your passion or following your passion, and also our obsession kind of with becoming experts and folks who don't make mistakes, I actually really deeply believe that it's the folks who can kind of channel their curiosity and their inner beginner, that regardless of your skill level and how close or far away you are to being an expert, will actually make you a more creative and innovative, compassionate, empathetic leader. And so the whole book is about that. And that kind of launched me into a little bit of an obsession with the word pluck. It's also very fun because there's lots of, punny things that you can do with the pluck word. So Plucking Up, when we set out to create this podcast, we wanted to create a library of stories around rejections, around failures, around mistakes, demystifying kind of the more untold behind the scenes stories that every single person that I have ever met, been friends with, had the opportunity to interview on the show. The more successful you are, generally, the more pluck ups and failures you have. And I think we as a society and culture have gotten to a place where we're like, oh yeah, like fail forward and failure is requisite. But they can still, even that idea can still stay in the platitude realm. And so what I really want to do is tease that out of people and say, yeah. Okay, you failed at something. Tell us about it. Tell us what happened. How did you feel? How did you move forward through it? And my hope in doing that is just to create a community of people who feel a little bit less alone as they are going out into the world and building lives of purpose and passion and impact, likely plucking up and making mistakes along the way, so that they don't get stuck in their shame or in the belief that they're making mistakes because they're stupid or not cut out for the job. And instead, so we can kind of build this collective consciousness that says oh, I'm messing up because I'm doing something meaningful in the world. And that's kind of how it all came about. So Liz Gilbert was actually our first guest on the Plucking Up podcast. I mean, talk about coming out of the gate with a bang. I'm a huge fan of her work. So my core memory was standing in my office, and the podcast studio at the time was in my bathroom. So I think standing in my bathroom, super, super nervous, one of those mornings where you just wake up and you're just your stomach is totally in knots because you know what's ahead of you. And then having her pop on, and she was wearing a beanie and just I think she had a blanket on. She was very cozied up. And I just immediately kind of had this sense of oh yeah, she's super famous. She's really successful. She's, made best-selling books and movies and the whole deal. And she's just a human. And she was super warm and kind and humble. And so I think that reminder of listen, we all put our pants on, there is that phrase, we all put our pants on one leg at a time. And we say that very confidently. I'm sure there's people that don't do that. But yeah, just the reminder that we're all humans showing up and doing the best that we can. And I had a blast. And I think probably it was probably love at first sight with my podcast of just oh my gosh, I can somehow, here's a actual excuse to just cultivate meaningful conversation and ask people questions. Yes, please. I want to do this forever. Any sort of ritual that I do, I generally just like to, if I am afforded the time and even just have 2 or 3 minutes, just do some kind of self-reflection. I think it's easy when you're doing something like a podcast to immediately be thinking about everybody else and how are people going to experience the show and what are their takeaways going to be. And I want the show to be something that is really encouraging, that's super engaging, but also I don't want to miss the fact that it's pretty amazing that I get to sit down and frankly spend an hour with folks that might not otherwise give me an hour of their time. So if I'm able, and if I'm not, if I haven't taken the interview over, which I do quite often, and I'm not in a place where I have to pop off and scramble to the next thing, just taking a few moments to jot down what for me stood out. How was I impacted by that? And are there any pieces of wisdom or vulnerability that I want to carry forth within me after the show? Have I had a pluck up within Plucking Up? Yes, I would say it's been an interesting thing to navigate. I want to bring my full self to the table in the show. And I really want to be honest and to be vulnerable and to engage our guests in a way that doesn't feel really scripted or I have an agenda. I'm trying to get something out of them and I'm kind of just pointing at them in that way. And if you listen to the show, the style of the show isn't just straight interview. I've got questions. It really is. I'm just trying to cultivate meaningful conversation. I am a verbal processor. So I have to either write or speak about things oftentimes to work out what I actually believe or what I actually think. And so I do that on the show with our guests instead of being okay, I'm only going to talk about things where I know exactly how I feel about it or I feel comfortable with being recorded. There is some verbal processing that happens. So I would say probably a third of the time I end the show and go, man, I don't know if I actually believe that. Like I said something and now I'm like going back and I'm thinking about it. And maybe I'm just kind of like having an internal moment with myself. I think in the beginning, I would like lay awake at night and just feel like nervous, or I would regret saying something or not saying something. And that has been really challenging because it feels out of control of like somebody could take that thought or that idea or something that I said and they're holding to it as like gospel or fact. And I'm like, no, I was actually just like kind of testing that idea out, but then it got recorded and distributed to all of these people. So it really has been an exercise, I think, for myself, which is great because as leaders, I think this is one of the most powerful things that we can do is just like reminding myself that it is like, it's in my power to create the most honest, authentic content or project or product that I can. And then what happens to it once I release it out into the world actually isn't in my control. And that's kind of the scary thing, but it's also part of the magic, right? That there's all this alchemy that happens where we put something out into the world and it touches somebody in a specific way, or it ignites something completely different in somebody else, and we don't really get to control. There's something that is happening beyond us, and kind of trusting in the magic and the alchemy of that, even when it does feel really tender and vulnerable, because my desire to control things is strong. You're not alone. My favorite part about being a podcast host is I honestly feel like probably of most of the things that I do, there's this whole concept of like flow. You know, when you get into flow, you're not looking at the clock and you're not thinking about how long it's taking and you're not like all of those things. I think hosting a podcast is that for me. Like once the camera turns on and once the guest is there, it just requires complete and total presence with another person. And also just curiosity and asking questions and cultivating conversation is literally one of my favorite things to do. So the fact that I get to do it and then do it in a way where we get to invite other people into it, it just really feels really special. I feel really lucky to get to do this work.